And we're live. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Hey,
Hello.
thanks so much for joining us this morning, this afternoon, this middle of the night, depending on where you're at. My name is Janae Phillips. I'm the Director of Leadership and Education at the Harry Potter Alliance. I know we have a lot of new folks joining us today. So if you don't know a lot about the HPA, we are an international nonprofit, and we use Fandom to get folks involved in activism, which I know is something both of these lovely people are super involved in as well. Thank you both for joining us today, for hanging out with us for an hour. Would you both like to introduce yourselves and a bit about you?
Kiah.
I'll happily go first. Hey, everyone. So my name is Kiah Morris, and I'm actually based here in the United States, over in Vermont, in the New England area. I am an activist, an artist, a performer, writer. I'm a former elected official. Yeah, reformed politician. But out here on these streets trying to do what I can. A huge fan of Harry Potter. It was actually, and Hermione specifically has big hearts for me. Actually, I did research on Harry Potter and Hermione, talking about a lot of the things we're going to talk about today. And I am so excited to connect up with the Harry Potter Alliance, and so just in awe of the amazing work that y'all do here. So super, super excited to join you today.
Thanks.
First of all, I want to talk about your research into Hermione, but I'm Luke Baines. I am an actor and writer. I guess producer now, something that I just added to my bow recently. And I am a huge Harry Potter fan, but I'm also was on a show that has a really big following that is also based on a book series. So Kiah and I kind of, had a conversation about how we could work together and how could we mobilize more people. So
yeah, and I think a fun fact that's important to know, both Luke and I are big supporters of Oxfam America, Oxfam International, and we do a lot of humanitarian work and have done some work together. And so this is where all the beautiful worlds collide on a fabulous afternoon. So
yeah, we love Oxfam. We've done some work with them in the past too. So big shout out to them.
That warms my heart, because I've been working with them for, like Kiah, for years, and I love them so much. So.
Yeah. So we are here to talk about a lot of things. Let me tell you, the notes that I have seen from these folks just on the breadth of stuff we could talk about. We're going to do our best to get to as much of it in an hour as we can. There's so much to discuss in this subject. But we are also here as part of the Harry Potter Alliance's Granger 2020 campaign, where we are trying to get as many people, as many fans, as many fan activists to place their vote in the upcoming United States election. So if you text Team Granger to this number, it will actually lead you to a page where you can check your voter registration, you can make a pledge to vote, and you can think about 3 other people that you're going to talk to about voting. And so sometime during this conversation, I encourage you to text that number, text Team Granger to 40649, and go ahead and go through that process. Even if you're like, I'm registered to vote, just check it. Just double check it if you haven't yet, and make that pledge to headcount, letting them know that you are going to vote in this election. So, Luke, I think it would be awesome if you wanted to talk a bit about kind of what has led you to be so engaged in fandom, because not every actor automatically does that, So I'm really curious about kind of what has your journey been? Why are you so engaged, not only in fandom, but in this idea of fan activism and the power that fans hold? What stood out like that for you?
It's interesting. I've actually never really thought about that. It happened rather organically, really. I think one of the reasons why I did get so involved, though, with the Shadowhunters fandom is because I have been living in Los Angeles for close to 9 years, I think. Someone should fact check that. And I'm sure they will.
Wikipedia.
I really went through that process of struggling as an actor to break in, to get an agent, to even get in rooms, to, get in auditions. And then once you book things, it's like if you don't have a name behind you, you don't have a big profile, you're not going to book things. Like the amount of times I have, received an email from a director being like, wish I could have hired you, but we had to go in a different direction. So, and then once I did get the films and the other things that kind of came with it, it was always about, I did a lot of independent films. So it was about trying to get people to watch the movie, And so when I joined Shadowhunters, there was already this incredible built-in fan base, and they're so passionate. And one of the things I was actually going into the role I was so scared of was upsetting the fandom, because I, hilariously, for a lovely 360 moment, was a huge Harry Potter fan. And there were parts of the books that when they were turned into films that I didn't love. And I was like, I don't want that to happen to the Shadowhunters fans. Like, I don't want to let them down, and I wanted to know, what it was about my character that inspired them, and what it was about the show that inspired them, to make sure that when I was playing that role, I could tap into it. And so from there, it kind of just became a really organic, partnership with the fans, and they have been, they've stood behind me with a lot of campaigns that I've done with Oxfam, which has just meant the absolute world to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's so cool to have the more. Oh, hi.
Hey, bud.
I think
Ben right there.
they can join us. It's fine. New panelist. But yeah, this I think we see this more and more with folks who had the experience of being a fan themselves and then get to be part of something and know exactly what it feels like when a scene is not how you imagined it. So that's really cool that was kind of part of your experience, and why maybe you're a little bit more clued into fandom life. But so we have such an interesting mix of experiences and backgrounds from both of you, of just having been an actor and creator, and having been a fan and a fan scholar, and a former politician, and all of those things are so intrinsically connected to what we're experiencing right now as fan activists, right? And so this discussion, we really want to talk about representation and racism. And I wondered if either one of you can talk about, why that feels important right now. Because I think, there's so many things, right? There's the world's constantly on fire. There's so many things to talk about. So why does representation kind of hold a special place in your hearts as something that deserves attention and focus and can be a tool right now?
Do you mind if I?
Yes, please.
Yeah, great. Awesome. Thank you. So it's interesting because it wasn't something that I think I had fully sort of understood and had a critical analysis around until I started doing the work on Hermione. And what really had come to me is I was like, there's this great character. She's this amazing girl character. And when we look in the world of, Western kind of canon and how we talk about girls and adventure stories and all this stuff, she's really great, but what the hell? I'm like, a lot of things that are just kind of like, what is going on with, how she's represented and what she's telling us, how the author was using her to tell us as an audience things. And I said, well, it's entering into curriculums all over the world. Like, people are reading this to their children at this small age. It is part of an entire conversation that's happening around the world. And I think people are wanting to find a place to understand what that means to have that kind of representation, and how they can think about it and how it relates to themselves. And so that was one of those first kind of aha moments of being like, oh my gosh, this is actually truly important. And I was fortunate that I had my thesis advisor that had supported me in this work, because I thought I was being silly. I was like, I'm a women's studies major. I'm going to study Harry Potter. I was supposed to be like deep, hard, difficult, challenging things, right? And I'm like, let me talk about Harry Potter. And she was like, no, I actually did a bunch of research on Star Trek. And what that looked like, what that meant like in that era for people to see that level of diversity. And was it really diverse? Did it just reinforce tropes? How was it actually received? How did the audience receive? How did the people that were seeing themselves reflected feel about that moment? Thank you. Yes, Jamal. I mean, mommy's going to talk, so you're going to have to sit over there and be awesome for me, okay? Thank you so much. Very totally loved. But anyway. We're all learning today. So that's the point of thinking about that. Jamal Renee Lutton. Thank you. You got the middle name there. So both the joy and the challenge of thinking about yourself. You know, how do I see myself in this work? In this very moment in time, when I'm watching this TV show, how does it make me feel? When I see that person on screen, am I able to relate to them? Do they reflect any parts of my culture or my experience? How is that representation telling me about where I stand in the world? So, so this is a really powerful conversation. And as you said, looking at the notes, I'm like, oh, we could just go all kinds of things. Well, I didn't even know My Little Pony was a thing. Where can we go with this next? Talk about representation, and let's talk about how it reflects on fandom, and let's talk about how it relates to our societal need to do work in this world. So that was me talking for a whole awful lot, and I will let Luke put her piece up in there.
No, please. That was great. I think that it is so important, you know, just to listen, especially for me right now as a white male. You know, I'm hearing from people that I love and people that I respect, like Kiah, and I'm hearing that there's a problem. I'm most of the time not experiencing the problem firsthand, but I'm hearing that there's a problem, so I want to help. I think that that's as simple as that. People are telling me that they are upset, that they are not represented, that they don't see themselves on screen, or they don't feel heard, they don't feel seen. And if I'm in a position to be able to do something about it, I would like to. So that's kind of where I'm coming from.
Yeah. Yeah. For anyone who is not as familiar with Shadowhunters, who's maybe coming from Harry Potter fandom, or for our Shadowhunters fans who just want to hear some notes on it, do you want to talk for just a minute about kind of representation in Shadowhunters and kind of what that baseline was like compared to Harry Potter?
It's interesting because, you know, in the emails we had talked, and one thing that Kiah had brought up was asking about what representation is like in Shadowhunters, and specifically in the fandom. And from my perspective, I think that the show and the books did a great job of showing representation. However, as someone who is not in that category, I don't know, you know, it might be very, very different. But one of the things that I did witness, I grew up watching Buffy and was obsessed with Buffy, loved that show. And before I joined the show, I started watching Shadowhunters because I joined in season 3. And in the first season, there is this incredible moment where essentially the lead boy, who is like, you know, the hottest guy around, falls for another guy and stops his wedding, and has this incredible moment where in front of his family and friends and his work, he works at the Institute, you know, declares his love for this man. And it was something, and it's an interracial relationship, and it's something that, as someone who was watching it and not involved in it at that time, I just thought that was such a wonderful thing for kids to see, you know. And this isn't a show that's watched just by young people. It always blows my mind how it's like it goes from 10-year-olds to 70-year-olds.
Right.
But I also know that, like, had I have been at school when I had watched that, I do think that how I would frame certain things would be completely different. So for that reason, I was super proud to be a part of this show.
Right.
And it is a truly diverse cast. It really, really is. And so that's, you know, that's phenomenal in and of itself. So
yeah. So I know Kiah had a lot of thoughts on this, but for both of you, you know, let's talk about the good representations of representation, right? Like what are some good wins we've had lately, or where are you seeing, you know, progress be made kind of in modern media and fandom? And I know, Kiah, you also had some thoughts about, you know, fandoms we might not think about immediately when we're talking about Harry Potter and Shadowhunters and stuff too. So I'd love to hear kind of like what can we look to as like this is the direction we should be going, you know?
So some huge wins that I think that were out there. I mean, if we could just take a moment to just sort of sit and bask in the glory of all of the amazing things that was the Black Panther.
Yeah.
The Black Panther film series, right? So what that meant for folks from the African diaspora. And so when I use phrase like African diaspora, we're talking about folks who find their roots of origin within Africa and are throughout the world, obviously for many reasons, not only just migration, but through the transatlantic slave trade and all sorts of things. So everywhere that you saw folks that were feeling melanated, there was a distinct moment that happened in that. And there was so much intentionality on the part of the creators, every part of that creative team, in the ways that they were going to choose to represent that film. And I think, I mean, and I know the Harry Potter Alliance has an amazing, if you haven't checked it out, they have like a whole toolkit guide that they helped produce that's just phenomenal.
I can drop a link in the chat.
It breaks down a lot of the things that we're thinking about. You know, we're sort of trying to articulate right now. We're trying to say, what is that? What is that exactly? Being able to see and feel why certain characters were important and the ways that their characters were represented were super, super important. And even the smallest details, you know, Ryan Coogler talking about like, you know, in this one scene, he had T'Challa and he had, he was specifically trying to make a red, black, and green motif happening in the space. And they were the only folks that had the color. And it was important because it was a Pan-African flag, right? And so those are the colors that come from almost every nation within Africa has red, black, or green in it. And so that's why that has, in the African-American flag, it's got importance. But little, small details to massive ones, to even being able to say the Dora Milaje are based off of a group of women warriors that actually existed in Africa and being able to like make those linkages. And so going through that experience, you saw folks in Africa just like going nuts as they rightfully should, right? Because it's so beautiful to also see their Africanness represented in a place of strength and in beauty, in a place of abundance and wealth. And so instead of it constantly being USA for Africa because we're dealing with famine and, you know, man-made wars and disasters, which are still very real, but there was this one space in time and in place that we had a whole world that actually did not need Western civilization, that we could imagine that level of self-sufficiency that would have probably naturally had its arc had not colonialism come through and disrupted the incredible innovations and the science and technology that were coming out of that continent at that time. We might be there. We might have actually been there had we not had, you know, history interrupted and disrupted in the ways that it did. So even as African Americans, being able to see that and feel that and hearing the conversations between what that meant between Killmonger and T'Challa and like just all of these things were just triumphant. That's helped our children. I mean, with the passing of Chadwick Boseman, that was like really devastating. And actually my son doesn't know. I haven't told him yet. But we'll have that conversation later. Still within that, you know, with Chadwick Boseman being gone, all of the children, the little beautiful black and brown children who were mourning, holding funerals with their Avenger dolls because their hero was gone. That's the power of representation when it's done at its full tilt.
Right.
So, yeah. That's an amazing example that I think was very proud. And then we can, if we want to, in time, we can go back to talking a little bit about other spaces where we are fans, even as consumers, beyond the realms that we're talking about today.
I just want to add that the booklet for anyone who is watching is incredible, and I think it's so well done. It is of like, you know, I as I've said, I've worked with charities for a hot minute, and the level of insight into it was so interesting. I really loved it.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, shout out to Define American and Docu Black and Bamba John Bamba, who all partnered with us on that one. Yeah. So, Luke, do you have a favorite? Hey, this was a freaking awesome representation win lately?
You know, it's funny because Black Panther, I think when I saw it in the movies, I cried because obviously I'm not someone who needs to see like represented on screen anymore. We've had hundreds of years of that, but it was so wonderful to watch and see like just Blackness being celebrated in such a beautiful way, and it also gave me hope for like my nieces and nephews who are watching that. And you know, I grew up in Australia, which has a lot of racism. Obviously, there is racism everywhere. It's a different kind of racism in Australia, and I think a lot of the racism in Australia comes from not knowing it. It comes from almost an ignorance of not being involved, because it's not a huge a forefront issue like it is here. So for me to be able to know that my nephews and nieces in Australia are watching that movie and are understanding the power of it, I think that was probably the best example. And genuinely, not just saying this because I was on the show, I really did think that Shadowhunters did a wonderful job of, you know, melting so many different worlds. And, you know, it's something that I'm sure we'll get into in terms of, you know, Kiah and I both write. She does it better, but you know, both write, and as storytellers, you come across choices that you have to make, and I think it's so important to think about how those choices relate in a commercial sense as well. So, for instance, you know, in Shadowhunters, they have an interracial couple that is also a gay couple, and I think that for the network to openly put money behind that and say, yes, we think that this is going to, because at the end of the day, you know, networks are not making shows because they want to advance social change. They're making shows because they want to make money. And so for them to still put that relationship front and center, I think that takes a lot of almost courage, because I know that had they perhaps not had that relationship front and center, that the show might have been more commercial in certain senses. You know, it might have, the show was, from what I understand, hugely popular internationally, but within the States didn't quite take off. And I think that, I mean, I'm not sure whether that's the reason, but I think it's interesting to think about those sorts of things, of making sure that we are representing properly, and how does that fit in with the commercial choices that we have to make as storytellers?
Well, I mean, and even in that, and not to get too like wonky into Shadowhunters as well, but then later there's a lesbian relationship, right? Isn't it, between like a Celia and somebody else? And that's also interracial, I think. And like there's a whole, like, it continues to give a space for just imagining worlds that don't exist.
Yes.
I shouldn't say worlds that don't exist, worlds that are not in front of us. So that is part of the problem, the challenge of representation, is that what you see is what you believe. And so if you are not able to see it, then you don't know that it's real. And so here was an opportunity to say that even within this fantasy world, no, that, of course, hello, why would it?
And what I thought, I mean, and I'm interested to know your thoughts on this, Kiah, but what I thought was really interesting was that, let's say that the first interracial relationship between the two boys, I'm 99% sure that it's, I think I'm 100% sure. I'm going to say 99 just to save myself. But that race is never discussed. But what is discussed is the fact that one of them is a shadow hunter and one of them is a warlock. And the fact that you're not meant to have relationships between different magical creatures, essentially. And that, for me, was a way that Cassandra Clare and also our showrunners were able to talk about race without it being too like overt. It was a message that was there, and it was very prominent. It was, you know, even as much as the fact that, you know, other magical beings weren't allowed to come into the Institute, which is like, you know, Hogwarts. Like, it's the, you know, the werewolves weren't allowed inside Hogwarts. So I think that is a really, really interesting way to look at storytelling and representation.
I mean, and thank you for even bringing Harry Potter back into that sphere as well, because we do see that. We see that very clearly in the ways that we talk about between those that are Muggle and those that are magical, right? But then we also see that within, there's still race and class throughout the whole thing. And even bringing about the tropes of the, you know, thinking about what that means for Dobby and the house elves and all of that. There's so very, very much that speaks to that. And by, in some ways, not assigning race to it, it gives you a freedom of ability to imagine. But on the other hand, also it can also work conversely to say that it's not important when it is.
Yeah.
Right.
Do you know what I'm saying? So
and that's what I was getting at in terms of, by not painting it front and center, is it also a disservice?
And I mean, because there are small things that can be done. So even within that, it may not fit within the storyline if you're trying to pull straight from the canon to the film in a direct relationship in this way. Because if it wasn't there in the canon, that doesn't mean you can't reimagine it. Like, that's what fan fiction is all about. It's like, okay, this was missing. Let's reimagine it some other way, right? Let's fix the things that we feel like need to be fixed, right?
Yes.
So, and the directors definitely do that. There are huge divergences between the film and the books. If we talk about the Harry Potter series, right?
Yeah.
So, and there were things that the director said, well, fix that. Let's fix that. Let's give Hermione a punch to Malfoy instead of slapping him in the face, which is very gendered, right? Versus punching in the face, which has a very different meaning and connotation for that, right? And so there are choices that you make to fix those things so you can have some license with it. But it's like, it's interesting that sometimes, unless you have representation in the creative space as well, that those subtle things, like, why couldn't you have somebody, beyond having a French or a Russian accent, what if somebody spoke another language? What if they had little things that they might do about the food that they eat that's slightly culturally important, so that that child, who's watching that character will be like, oh my gosh, I eat that same thing.
Right.
Oh my God says the exact same thing when she's married. She's totally like, this is how she yells. Wow, she does this. It's a chancla coming at your head, like, and like, wouldn't that have been great with flying chanclas and through Hogwarts? That would have been good. So anyway, hey, let somebody write that story. Somebody write that story. So okay.
I mean, it's those touchstones, right? And I think that's kind of part of what you were talking about with Black Panther and obviously Black Panther is very much directly talking about race, but part of the beauty of it too was just the details of the worlds that they built around them. And if you produced a movie like that maybe wasn't talking directly about race relations as part of the central plot, but did have that many like cultural touch points to be celebrated and to kind of see that representation on screen, I think that's such a huge part of that feeling of like, oh, this is for me, or like I'm represented here, like my culture is represented here, my experience is represented here. And with Harry Potter too, that we talk a lot about blood status as kind of a way to talk about race, right? But as you're saying, though that entire conversation is happening throughout the books and the movies, when you're not talking about it directly, things like Lavender Brown in the movies was cast as a Black actress right up until Lavender Brown was a more prominent character in the fifth movie, and then she was recast as a white actress. And so the conversation can be happening in kind of that mythological fantasy means, and then still absolutely not be happening in the reality of it, right? So I think it's really important to remember that both are good. Like, I think these kind of invitations into the conversation, like you were talking about, Luke, are really helpful for getting conversations started, but you really need to have both present, right?
Well, I think, one of the storylines that Shadowhunters did that I thought was incredible, but I admittedly missed when I read the script, didn't really realize, probably because also I was reading for me, like, oh God, how many lines do I have to learn? But, I didn't realize it until I happened to be on set, because it was a storyline that one of my good friends was doing on the show. So I wanted to watch. I had a conversation with him about it. He was telling me the importance of it, which was that in one of the episodes, the governing body of the Shadowhunters decided that they were microchipping non-Shadowhunters and actually coming up with a list and putting people on a list. And, you know, the actor was explaining to me, he's not of Jewish heritage, but his character is. And his character has a very adverse reaction to being put on a list. And for obvious reasons. And I think that while that is such an important thing, it's a storyline that, you know, that has a lot of importance. Perhaps the fact that it wasn't so front and center means that you're going to miss it. You know, like I missed it on the page. I saw it on the screen because of the amazing actor. But, you know, it's one of those things where it's 100% a balance.
Right. And Jax in chat was just talking about Simon. Looks like it's the Jewish character. So you all are on the same wavelength.
Where's the chat at?
Yeah, it's right on the side here on the comments.
Full screen.
Yeah. There's been lots of good. Some folks were talking about Maya and Imogen as well. Also talking about there's ace representation on Shadowhunters. It looks like an ace character, asexual.
Oh yes, there is.
Yeah. Which is another thing that is rarely represented in any media currently. So shout out to that.
Hello from the chat. Hi, everyone.
Yeah, so I want to bring it back a little bit to something you mentioned earlier, Luke, in talking about the ways that, you know, things. Yeah, I think that these companies, the networks, are trying to make money, right? And we all know that that is part of the reality of, you know, being in fandoms that are also caught up in corporations and all of those things. It's media, it's stories we love, and there's also a lot of financial reality to it. And you had talked about, you know, the way that things perform, and that, you know, part of putting that sort of representation on screen is often a bid of like, do we think this is going to be popular enough to earn money, to be successful? And I just think that's a really good transition into talking about, you know, what power do fans have? Because I think that's such an important thing of part of asking for representation, and part of demanding representation is also showing the demand by showing your support, right? So like when you see an episode coming out with that, you know, are you gonna throw a watch party? Are you gonna show up to tweet about it and talk about how much you loved it? Are you gonna show up for new shows and new media that's coming out? And I know both of you have been really engaged in that in different ways. So I think it'd be awesome to just kind of talk about, you know, fans as organizers. Like there's a reason we do fan activism. Fans can be super powerful organizers. But what are some ways that you think, you know, fans really can show that power, or ways that we can really kind of leverage the fact that we're in these communities and we have this power as an audience and as viewers to really keep moving representation in the right direction, right?
100%. Kiah, do you want to hit us off? Or do you want me to?
You have the big fan.
Just on that point, two things I wanted to say. One was, you know, kind of circling back to the start of your question, which was around the commercial aspect of storytelling. I had a script that I wrote that is still probably the script I'm most proud of. And it was about a 17-year-old boy who gets sent to a reparative therapy camp in America, which is where they use psychology and religion essentially to kind of change a person's sexual orientation. And I wrote this script, and it went through so many different production companies who were interested and then dropped it, and they're interested and dropped it and interested and dropped it. And it all came back to the fact, because at one point we had cast the entire film, and at one point it came back to just the fact that people weren't willing to put money behind a gay film because they didn't think it would have the audience. And so when you think about something like that, and that was, I wrote that script like 6 years ago, I think. And what's interesting is that the film actually did get made. It wasn't my film. It was the same topic. and it was told in a different way, but it was essentially the same idea. And the reason that film got made is because the director and the two lead actors, it was Russell Crowe, Nicole Kidman, and I cannot for the life of me, Joel Edgerton directed it, I think. Yes. One of the Edgerton brothers directed it. Anyway, my point is that it was people who have a huge following and a huge profile who put their hand up and said, I'm going to do this movie. So then when investors and financiers are looking at it, and it may still be a movie where the it is around sexuality, but because they have these huge lead actors in it, they think that people will go see the movie anyway. So I think that, that's why it's important to keep having these conversations and make sure that while we are battling corporations and we're battling networks who do want to make money, we as storytellers and artists have the power to make change and maybe put our name behind something that ordinarily wouldn't get funding. To answer your question about the fandom, this is something that I'm incredibly passionate about, because I noticed that when I joined the show, there was this very, very passionate fandom. And whether it was the Teen Choice Awards or People Choice Awards, or even when the show got cancelled, we apparently had the most amount of, I think we were a top 10 trending topic for 2 years or something, say Shadowhunters. And, the fandom purchased planes that circled the Netflix building and buses. They got 18 buses in London with ads. Korea, it was everywhere. And I looked at that and I just was so blown away that people would care so much about something, and that they would organize in such an incredible way. I have worked, I have a business degree, and I've worked in public relations and communications and crisis management for a few years. And I understand how hard it is to organize anything. So the fact that these fans mobilized and were able to do something, I just thought was so incredible. And I remember saying to, we actually just gone to the People's Choice Awards, where I think we won 4 awards that night. And I got taken by one of the lead actresses. She took me along, and it was such an incredible experience, because we won all these awards. And what was crazy was that in the room, when they announced the award, it was there wasn't a ton of noise. It was they read out the list, and it's this show, and everyone's this show, Shadowhunters, and there wasn't a huge force in the room. But we ended up winning. And it was because of these fans, these international fans who were at home, who were just so passionate about the show. And I think, rightly so, in their head, they thought, if we can get them as many People's Choice Awards, then the network will realize how great the show is and pick it back up. Great strategy. Unfortunately, there were powers of B that didn't, whatever. But the point that I'm getting at was, I remember leaving there and saying to my friend, look at what they just did. Look at the power that these people have. And if there was one thing that I could impart upon the Shadowhunter fandom and the Harry Potter fandom, it's look at what you can do when you want to do something and you want to create change. And that's one of the reasons, Janae, why I'm so excited to talk to you guys, because I think the fact that you're being able to mobilize that passion is so important. I promise I'm going to stop talking in 1 second. It's just, I'm excited about this. But one of the things that I worked on a campaign with Oxfam around the war in Yemen, and essentially we were trying to get a 1-year ban on the US sending support to Saudi Arabia, just so that we could kind of release the tension there in Yemen. And I asked the fandom to help me. Essentially, I was can you guys tweet or Instagram these 5, key decision makers, and tell them how important this is? And we had, in 2 weeks, we had 27,000 tweets and Instagrams directed at these 5 people. So, if you split that up, that looks like a lot of people who are really interested in an issue. Yeah. And we know 100% through Oxfam that people in those offices saw those tweets and saw those Instagrams and put that issue on the table. So that for me is I think if there is ever anything that I, can be proud of within this fandom and like the work with Oxfam, it's like I'm so proud that we were all able to do that, because I think that is something really interesting, and I'm so excited to know how we can keep doing that moving forward.
Yeah, snaps to Shadowhunters fandom, man.
Honestly,
that's
they
awesome.
are and I am genuinely. It's so funny because I remember I don't know, 5 years ago, seeing actors talk about fans and being like, "Oh, we love them so much," and me being like, "No, you don't." But I genuinely they're I am so in awe and so inspired. And I say this to my friends, so it's not anything I would none of my friends can even call me out on it, because I talk about this all the time. How much I am inspired by it. So
yeah, I'm sure Kiah has a lot to say on this subject as well. But I think it's just such a the Harry Potter Alliance is in an interesting spot of, we talk to people who are fan organizers and fans, and we talk to people who are in the more kind of traditional organizations, grassroots mobilization organizations. And we get the question a lot of why does it work so well with fans? Why are they able to kind of make this transition from fandom to social issues and social change? And we're always like, because they already know how to organize. That's half of fandom, right? It's doing grassroots mobilization. And so I think the point that you're making is really important for everyone watching to hear, that you have the same skills that people mobilizing for social change have. You can apply everything you do for fandom to making social change. If you all can organize buses to drive around Netflix, and you applied that kind of energy to getting people to the polls or to mail-in ballots in this election, that's what we're talking about, right? That is the kind of power that fandom has, and it's why it's so important for us to kind of pull out all of our skills whenever it's the moment, and be like, all right, yeah, we got this, no problem. We can Twitter organize, we can use social media, we know how to find people and who are in our corner,
Yeah, and it's creating the world that you want to see. And I know that we talk about that a lot, but it's shows like Shadowhunters would be more widely received and more successful commercially if the world itself opened up their belief system. So it's the more that we do to change the world around us to the world that we want to see, the more that TV and film is going to reflect that, because it's all about money. It's all about where we put our money and what we are interested in. I'm going to stop talking about Kiah.
Yeah, Kiah, I feel like you must have a dozen thoughts about this.
Gorgeous about all of this. I mean, there's so many powerful things that you talked about already. So the fact that, your dollars actually make a huge difference. And in the work that I do in communities, I do with organizations, that I do with governments, it's really pushing people to push themselves more than they think that they could. So to constantly challenge themselves, to say, I don't think our audience will to say, try it. Try it. Because actually the buying power of the folks that aren't being represented is pretty massive.
Right.
And it's not all about you're trying to make a profit, but it is about making art that also resonates, right? So as a fandom, you do have an ability to say, as many have, speaking out against injustices that are happening in the world and in the things that you want to see and the content that you're looking for. But it's that's what's interesting about this is, as we were kind of trying to exam cram, think through what does this mean broader? Even beyond just these two kind of fandoms, what does this mean for us to dive into race and representation and even racism and what happens within that, within fandoms? Most of the content I found, and even myself, speaking of my own research, happened because I was a fan.
Right.
And so as a fan, you're in that world and you're critiquing that world very explicitly. Your K-pop fans have a duality. And there's many Black fans that come from different fandoms, came from Star Wars, came from all sorts of places. And we're I don't find myself in those fandoms. I find myself shut down in those fandoms when I'm trying to have a critical conversation around what does that mean for that kind of representation, or the way that you're talking about that particular character is actually kind of racist and hurtful, and finding themselves to not only being pushed out, but in some ways sort of like violently so. And we're able to find spaces like K-pop that is still not perfect, because of course nowhere's perfect. We've been screwing it up for centuries. But within that, have been able to find, again, another clear example of insane amounts of activism that can happen within a fan base that still has challenges. And so within that, I mean, Luke is taking an enormous step. I cannot tell you, even amongst some of the most powerful politicians that I have come across, and I can look them in the face, I can hold their hands and be like, I need you to speak with clarity about what is happening to Black and brown communities, to our communities of color, to our marginalized folks. I need you to be unapologetic. This is not time to be cute and hold hands and be like, let's just sort of make it palatable. Come with it right now. That are still afraid to do so. And yet you have individuals like Luke, and I'll even say for myself, because there's a risk that comes with that. There's, you know, I have a whole security thing. We got whole security things in our lives here, Luke and I do, right? That we have to constantly manage because we've made ourselves so visible in this way. But if we don't do it, no one will. And that is the same thing that you can do. You can be visible. And I know that it can be scary to do so, but that invisibility also silences your own voice.
Completely.
And that's things of your own heart that need to be.
There's also a way to do it, I think, you know, in a way that speaks to the world around you. I know, like, for instance, there are a lot of people who are not living in America right now, and obviously the election is something that the three of us are very passionate about, and which is why we have our Text Granger link down the bottom. So if you are in America, please do that. You know, I think that what's interesting is that you can talk to people from your perspective, and I think that that's something that people forget. Or you can also talk to people from your friend's perspective. Like, if you are in America, for instance, and one of the things that you talked about, Janae, was that, you know, this, if you text this link, you get reminded to text 3 people to remind them to vote.
Yeah.
What I think is so interesting about that is, like, you know, think about 3 people that you know who wouldn't normally vote, or who wouldn't normally maybe take into consideration some of the stuff that we're talking about today. And perhaps you can tell them why that is important to you. You know, I think that getting a personal text from someone that is like, hey, John, I know that we probably don't see eye to eye on this, but I just want you to know where I'm coming from. This is where I'm coming from. I think that this is an important issue to me. I'm scared about this. I'm concerned about this. I want this. I think that we have, as human beings, more in common than we have apart. And so reaching out to somebody and being able to have that conversation, which it takes vulnerability to put yourself out there and say why something is important to you, but it's totally something that we can all do.
Yeah.
I also want to lift up, thank you for that, Luke, because I also want to lift up, like, right now, this is an important time that youth get involved in voting, if you are not already doing so. And in some states, I'm fortunate here, we have it so that you can be 17 at the time that you register. And as long as you're going to be 18 by the time that the November election happens, you can totally vote. So checking in with your friends, even to be like, do you know how to vote? Are you familiar with the mail-in ballots? Because if they're not done right, they'll be spoiled. So that can even be something as simple as that. Let me text 3 friends and be like, do you know how to handle your mail-in ballot? Do you want to, like, do a watch party for videos that might explain how it works in wherever you live, you know, so that we can all kind of know and help each other through that? Do you want me to take it and bring it to your town clerk for you? You know, I mean, people have been doing that. Even our postal service workers have been like, we're not even sending them to the plants where they might get delayed. We're taking them straight to where they need to go so they can be counted. Those are the types of things that you can mobilize your friends around so that they feel engaged in it. And you don't, you know, it's hard. Voting is something that we have placed such an importance on because it is crucial in every election. It's crucial, not just when there's a national election, but down to your school board, which, by the way, students, you can probably get on your school board. If you can't, you can get a petition to get youth on your school board. Just do that.
Right.
But that's another story. So all the same, people have a sort of shame also around voting. If they feel like, I didn't vote, I don't know who the candidates are, I'm not sure how to do it. And it's not something you want to admit that you have challenges around. So let's just get rid of that shame and directly person to person say, how can I help you? I don't know and I'm going to figure it out. Do you want to figure it out together?
Yeah, I think you're right in terms of, like, I know myself before I got involved in American politics, that it's scary because you don't want to put yourself out there and say something stupid to someone who you think might know more than you. You know, it's that thing of like, I don't want to talk to, you know, my elders and go into a debate over politics or whatever else. But at the end of the day, the one thing that you do know is your feelings. Like, you know how you feel. No one can tell you anything else. Like, you may not know the voting record of each candidate. You may not even know the candidate's name, but you do know what the issue is and why that is important to you. And you can absolutely talk to other people about that.
Yeah. And I think, you know, think about as fans, you know, what are some fun fandom things you can do that you can apply to things like voting, right? Like, we encourage our members to have meetups right now, digital meetups, but have a Zoom call party, like make some fandom themed treats and literally go through what's going to be on your ballots together. Make it just a group activity of like, it doesn't matter if you don't know exactly what this proposition is or what this measure is or who the heck that candidate is, and just kind of be there for each other. I think it harkens back to these same ideas around like gatekeeping and making that community open that we see reflected in both fandom and politics, right? There's, especially right now, I think there's a certain level of this fear you all were talking about around like, oh God, I don't want to be the person who doesn't know, right? I think I see that in fandom too, of like, oh, I don't want to be the person who doesn't know like this character name or like who hasn't watched this episode, right? I think like, right, like we can kind
I know all about that life.
Yeah.
When you do a convention and they're like, hey, so in episode 7, this happened, and you're like, hang on a second, give me 1 second. Like, we didn't shoot that sequentially, so I have no idea. Right.
So like, we can all kind of take this energy into all of these spaces of, if we're trying to create better worlds, both in our fandom spaces, in our media and our stories, and also in our politics and in our society, we can all kind of embody this sense of it is a space that's welcoming for people who are learning, right? Like, it's a space where if somebody asks me a question, I'm going to respond not in a, you don't know that way, but in a, yeah, let me answer this for you. Like, yeah, let me help you find out what was in episode 7, and let me help you find out who this candidate is and what they stand for, right? I think that kind of energy is important everywhere.
To be clear, you know, it's like my literal job is trying to help support both people getting into office and helping communities mobilize around voting and elections. And even I have screwed up my mail-in ballots before. Okay?
Yeah.
I did a whole demo. How you do your mail-in ballot, and guess who didn't sign the outside of the envelope? Like the last little step.
Yeah.
But this is also important too. So as you go through this process, understand that it's not done either. So take those learnings that you'll have from that and then use your activism to move forward. So I was able to then contact our Secretary of State and be like, I think you're making it inaccessible. There are barriers that are happening within doing these mail-in ballots that should not negate someone's ability to vote. You have to decide what's actually important to have to be able to prove that that person did their voting in the ways that they did. And around accessibility, around serious actual accessibility, making sure that things are translated into multiple languages. We talked to, you know, these were the conversations that we had to bring to the head of our elections in our state to say, I know you're not thinking of this, but this is where representation, that's where representation is important, to be able to say, you know what, folks from our disability community cannot order their ballots on their phones because that website's too small and that's just not reasonable. Right. That's the only way they have internet. Like those are the types of things that are necessary. So use that activism to think about yourself and others, make for that change. And vote and text. Text that.
Text Team Granger to 40649.
I just did it when we were talking, but just literally because I wanted to text Team Granger to someone.
Yeah, I should say, yeah, we're about fandom. I've got a little activist trinity up here on my wall. Side note, for anybody who is maybe uncertain about any of this stuff, if you go to granger2020.org, We have a bunch of resources up for folks who, if you want information on how do I talk to my friends about voting, how do I find what's on my ballot. We're constantly putting things out as the world changes every 48 hours, really. So we're trying to keep everything updated with what the current system is. There's also a couple different guides on there for exactly how to ask your representatives to make sure elections are safe during the pandemic. Exactly how to talk to your representatives about the post office. So all that stuff is made for you. You don't have to figure it out on your own. Just go look up these guides and just follow along with those. We try to make it as easy as possible for you all. I cannot believe we are at almost an hour already. I feel like I could talk to you both for at least another 2 hours, and I'm sure everybody in this chat could too. But just being cognizant of time, is there anything that you all would like to leave your fans with as we think about the rest of this year, as we think about how media continues to evolve and the stories that we want to see, and we think about, what fans can do in their fan spaces for representation and to fight back against white supremacy? What's the little nugget of wisdom you'd like to leave people with? I know that's a tall order. Just cover all those topics real quick for me. Yeah.
Go. 4 minutes. Go for it.
Okay, I think that the last thing I will say is I saw a stat the other day and I don't remember it, so I've come incredibly well prepared. I want to say it's 26%, but I think it's somewhere around that mark. Maybe it's 23. But in the United States, voter registration for people between the ages of 18 and 19 is down 26% from the 2016 election. That means, for whatever reason, people in that age group are not registering to vote. I would like to think it's because the deadline hasn't approached for a few people, and we do know that the younger we are, the less likely we are to adhere to a deadline. But keeping that in mind, I would just, for the people listening, whether or not you got involved with this because of Harry Potter or whether it was because of Shadowhunters, I would just think, if you were Harry or Hermione, or you were Lavender Brown, or you are Magnus in Shadowhunters, or you're Clary, what do you think they would do in this situation? If you were them and this was a real world example, what do you think they would do? And I think that knowing that you have that same amount of courage that they do, and of course they are fictional characters, but they are written about human beings, and we're all human beings. We all have it. We all have the same amount of hours in the day as Beyonce. And, I think I love that meme. It's one of my favorites. It's when I don't want to do something, but I want to go for a run or something. I'm like, Beyonce would. But, we all have it in us. So, think about it. Go out and be a Clary tomorrow. Go out and be Dumbledore for please, I beg you. I was going to swear, but I'm not going to. But that would be my parting words.
I want to just encourage you to keep hoping. It's really hard to keep our heads up right now. It's really hard to reach out right now. It feels like every day there's something new that's coming at us, and there's a new concern right down the street. It doesn't have to be a world away. It's right within our own communities, our neighborhoods, our apartment buildings, within our roofs. And so recognizing the difficulty of this moment, and that I know that our hearts are hurting about the state of the world and what we're dealing with, but to, as much as possible, hold on to hope, because that's the only way that we're going to find that fight, to turn that energy into active energy, as much as possible. This is not done. This is not done. There's always another day. And if we have to rebuild, then we will. We'll work together, and we'll have done it with that hope and that vision and that love. And I think that that's what comes through in all of these stories. Isn't that the through line through all of these narratives? At the end of the day, what is it? Che Guevara says, at the end of the day, essentially, I'm paraphrasing, at the heart of every revolutionary, it's an act of love.
Yep.
It's that love for humanity that makes us take these important steps. So.
Yeah. At the Harry Potter Alliance, we like to say the weapon we have is love. And it is exactly that. Well, thank you both so much for chatting with us today, for being here to turn out for representation for this election, for being involved in fandom. You all were awesome. Thanks to everybody in the chat. You all were awesome also. I love when the chat has its own like conversations going and you all are so clearly engaged. So keep this energy up. You can go back and watch. You can live vicariously through the chat all over again. Don't worry. But yeah, keep this energy up. Keep this conversation in your hearts. Keep that hope going. And yeah, thanks. Thanks everyone, and have a great rest of your weekend. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.